is you have to hammer time it, which means you got to break it down. Okay, so here's the thing. You'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. So you got to hammer time.
I can never unsee that. You're right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Real Agile or BS. I'm Peter Saddington with my wonderful colleague, Bob Hartman from Agile for All. We love answering all of your Scrum and Agile-related questions, and we have a question today that comes up a lot in class and comes up a lot with clients as well. It pertains to the size of a backlog item. So here's the question. Is it Real Agile or is it BS to work on 13-point stories or 13-point plus stories in a sprint? I'll hand it over to you, Bob, and maybe you want to explain a little bit about what points are all about.
Well, the points are basically a size of how long it'll take. Although people will say it's effort and complexity and all this other stuff. At the end of the day, a certain number of points adds up to a certain amount of time. That's the bottom line. 13 plus, the way points work, Peter, it could be perfectly fine to do a 13-point story in a sprint. Generally speaking, it won't be, but if my scale for a sprint is 0 to 100 and I have, a 13-pointer, it's not so bad. If my scale is 0 through 13 and I have a bunch of 13s, that's not good. I look at it like a game of Tetris. The larger the number of blocks we're trying to fit into the bottom of the thing, the harder it is. And so it just gets hard to fit those into a sprint. Most people, I think you'll agree with this, most people tend to equate a point with a day. Not a great comparison, but that's about what it works out to be for many groups. And the problem with that is 13-point story is really, really big. That's a lot of work for people to do in a sprint. The odds are it won't get done in the sprint. And when it's not getting done in the sprint, that's when we have a problem. I have no problem with 13-point stories if you're finishing them within sprints, but the odds are low. Now, this is old data, but I had a client a number of years ago, multiple clients, where I had access to their system so I could look and see the work that they had been doing in sprints. And I remember this precisely. There were 104 times those groups had tried to do a 13-point story in a sprint. 4 of those times they succeeded. Not good odds. Not good odds. And so for me, it's about what is 13 really relative to? Is it small or big? Is it too big to fit? If it's too big to fit, then it doesn't seem to be very agile. But I'm not going to say the hard and fast line is 13 because some people say, you know what, 1, 2, 3, 5, those are really small. Those are like an hour. 13 is like a day and a half. Fine. That's great. On the other hand, that scale gets really big in a hurry. I mean, I don't even know what with 13, 21, 34. I mean, it starts to get pretty crazy on the those numbers. So it gets a little weird, but it could be done, I suppose. I wouldn't recommend it ever, but how about you?
I'm going to take a different vantage point here. Now, I think I can completely agree with you that it's first and foremost, the points are all team relative, right? You can't transfer them over to other teams. So every team is going to have their own kind of point determination. But I'm gonna take a different approach to this. I don't think you should ever do a 13 plus ever. Now, and I'll even qualify a little bit more. I don't even like Fibonacci. So some of you guys out there might be like, "Whoa, he doesn't like Fibonacci." I hate Fibonacci. I don't like adding 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. It makes my brain hurt. And frankly, as we move into these odd type of numbers, it just doesn't work with my brain. So maybe it's a personality flaw or character flaw. I like doubles. I like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. It's just super simple. So if we relate a 13 in doubles, it would be like a 16. Regardless, I think if you have anything over a 10-point story, it's just way too large. It's way too large to obviously fit in the sprint, and it has to be broken down. Actually, I'm gonna share something that I share in my classes. It's gonna be really corny, but one thing that I help my students and my clients remember when it comes to anything over a 10-point or a 13-point or a 16-point story is you have to hammer time it, which means you got to break it down. Okay, so here's the thing. You'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. So you got to hammer time.
I can never unsee that. You're right.
You can never unsee it. But it's true. You should hammer time anything big, which means you got to break it down into something that's more manageable, more modular, something you can deliver within a sprint. So I always challenge any development team, whether you're a new team or you're a seasoned team, to continue to collect data over time of how many points you can do. But I would always be cautious that if you're moving into the 8 or the 16 or the the 13 point realm, it's probably a little bit too large. You probably need to do some refinement and or grooming on that story in the backlog, or during sprint planning, you need to functionally decompose it into smaller elements so that you can deliver it. I just find, and again, I have kind of a bias as an engineer developer, but for me, anything that large, there's just way too much complexity and there's too much emergence. I think that's the thing that's kind of rising in my gut as a developer, is that if you have stories that big, there's guaranteed to be what we call emergent discovery of complexity. And you just don't know what you don't know until you start unpacking it. Then you realize that 13-point story really is like a 20 or like a 50. And so I just want to be cautious out there for anyone that's like, yeah, man, we have a 100-point scale and we can do 13s. It's like, are you really that good at math? Because I I don't know if I could do a sprint that's 89 points, but maybe that's just me. So I don't like big stories. I think they are a big constraint on development. I think they create a lot of tension between the product team, the business, and development, because they're asking for this large item. We think we know what it is, but until we really break it down, let's be intellectually honest, you don't know what the real complexity is until you really break it down. So I'm going to take a harder line approach. I think 13-point stories are complete BS, but that's coming from my perspective. I'll give you the final word here, Bob.
Well, I can see where you're coming from, Peter. And there have been many times when I've been working with teams where they take a 13-point story and they break it down and it turns out to be an 8, a 5, 3 2s, and a 1. It's like, it's way over 13. So the emergence thing is absolutely real. I don't know of any teams where they're doing hundreds of points per sprint where a 13-pointer would fit. I'm just saying it's theoretically possible, but you're right. For the most part, it's got to be BS. It's just too big. It's just the odds of success are so low. It's not worth the risk. And when you break it down, you realize the odds of success were really zero, because I'll put it this way. I've never seen a 13-point story when you break it down end up being 13 points. It's always bigger. I've never seen it smaller. I've never seen it be a 13. It's always much bigger. Now, some of that stuff you may be able to throw away and make it be a 13, but boy, oh boy, the odds are just really, really low. So I agree. For the most part, BS, unless you have a really unusual team that's not in my current expertise.
Absolutely. So I'm going to leave all of our viewers out there with the final thing that you can't unsee. You got to break it down, hammer time it, something like that. But you guys might have different opinions. That's why we have comments, and that's why we have a great Agile community site that you can find at agileforall.com. So check it out. Make sure that you let us know if you have a different opinion or if you have a different experience from your development team. Thanks so much for joining us in today's Real Agile or BS. Smash the like button, share it, and certainly, again, join us at our Agile community site at agileforall.com. We'll see you guys next time.